Sacha Baron Cohen delivered what might be the most dangerous speech in modern entertainment history. Standing before the Anti-Defamation League, the man who built his career on offensive comedy has now become the face of digital censorship. What he's proposing isn't just content moderation, it's a complete restructuring of how information flows in the digital age. And the implications are terrifying. This isn't about stopping hate speech. This is about who gets to decide what you're allowed to think, say, and believe. Stay with me, because what Cohen revealed in this speech exposes the true agenda behind the censorship machine.
I'm just a comedian and an actor, I'm not a scholar, but one thing is pretty clear to me. All this hate and violence is being facilitated by a handful of internet companies that amount to the greatest propaganda machine in history. The greatest propaganda machine in history.
Right here, Cohen reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of how information systems work. He's calling social media platforms propaganda machines, but what he's actually describing is the democratization of information. For the first time in human history, ordinary people can bypass traditional gatekeepers, the media, the publishing houses, the academic institutions, and speak directly to massive audiences. That's not propaganda, that's the breakdown of information monopolies. Cohen built his career by getting past these same gatekeepers, using shock value and controversy to reach audiences directly. Now that everyone has that same power, suddenly it's a propaganda machine. The real propaganda machine was the old system where a handful of network executives, newspaper editors, and publishing houses controlled every piece of information that reached the public.
Let's think about it. Facebook, YouTube, and Google, Twitter, and others, they reach billions of people. The algorithms these platforms depend on deliberately amplify the type of content that keeps users engaged. Stories that appeal to our baser instincts and that trigger outrage and fear.
This is where Cohen's argument becomes completely hypocritical. His entire career is built on content that appeals to base instincts and triggers outrage. Borat wasn't successful because it elevated public discourse, it was successful because it was shocking, offensive, and outrageous. When Cohen had Borat sing, "Throw the Jew down the well," or when he showed up naked at business conferences, he was deliberately using shock value to capture attention. That's exactly what he's now criticizing algorithms for promoting. The difference is that when Cohen did it through traditional media channels, he was the one profiting from the outrage. Now that algorithms democratize that same process, allowing anyone to capture attention through controversial content, suddenly it's a problem that needs government intervention.
It's why YouTube recommended videos by the conspiracist Alex Jones billions of times. It's why fake news outperforms real news, because studies show that lies spread faster than truth.
Cohen is making a massive logical leap here. He's assuming that anything controversial or attention-grabbing is automatically a lie, and anything that comes from established institutions is automatically truth. But who exactly is determining what qualifies as fake news versus real news? The same media establishment that told us weapons of mass destruction definitely existed in Iraq? The same institutions that suppressed the lab leak theory for COVID-19? The same outlets that promoted the Russia collusion narrative for years? Cohen wants us to trust traditional gatekeepers to determine truth, but these gatekeepers have proven repeatedly that they're just as capable of spreading misinformation as anyone else. The difference is that when they do it, it's called getting the story wrong. When independent voices do it, it's called dangerous misinformation.
And it's no surprise that the greatest propaganda machine in history has spread the oldest conspiracy theory in history, the lie that Jews are somehow dangerous. As one headline put it, just think what Goebbels could have done with Facebook. On the internet, everything can appear equally legitimate. Breitbart resembles the BBC. The fictitious protocols of the Elders of Zion look as valid as an ADL report, and the rantings of a lunatic seem as credible as the findings of a Nobel Prize winner.
This comparison reveals Cohen's elitist worldview perfectly. He's essentially arguing that ordinary people are too stupid to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate sources of information. According to Cohen, people can't tell the difference between established news organizations and fringe conspiracy theories, so we need tech companies and government regulators to make those distinctions for us. But this assumes that establishment sources are inherently more trustworthy than alternative sources, which is demonstrably false. The BBC has pushed propaganda for decades. Major newspapers have covered up scandals and promoted false narratives. The difference isn't that established sources are more truthful, it's that they're more powerful. Cohen wants to preserve that power structure by having tech companies actively suppress alternative voices.
I told my interviewee that at the Women's March in San Francisco, Antifa were plotting to put hormones into babies' diapers in order to make them transgender. And this man believed it. I instructed him to plant small devices on 3 innocent people at the march and explained that when he pushed a button, he'd trigger an explosion that would kill them all. They weren't real explosives, of course, but he thought they were. I wanted to see, would he actually do it? The answer was yes. He pushed the button and thought he had actually killed 3 human beings.
This anecdote perfectly demonstrates Cohen's manipulation tactics and why his censorship arguments are so dangerous. Cohen deliberately targeted someone he knew was susceptible to conspiracy theories, fed him increasingly extreme false information, and then manipulated him into taking actions that Cohen could later use as evidence of how dangerous misinformation is. This isn't journalism or social commentary, this is entrapment. Cohen created the very problem he's now using to justify censorship. He literally fabricated fake conspiracy theories, found someone gullible enough to believe them, manipulated that person into taking extreme actions, and then pointed to that manipulation as evidence that we need more censorship. It's like an arsonist calling for more fire regulations after setting a building on fire.
This is not about limiting anyone's free speech. This is about giving people, including some of the most reprehensible people on earth, the biggest platform in history to reach 1/3 of the planet. Freedom of speech is not freedom of reach.
This distinction between freedom of speech and freedom of reach is one of the most insidious arguments in the modern censorship playbook. Cohen is essentially arguing that you have the right to speak, but not the right to be heard. You can say whatever you want in your living room, but tech companies should decide whether your ideas deserve to reach a broader audience. This completely inverts the traditional understanding of free speech, which has always included the right to seek and share information widely. Under Cohen's framework, you only have free speech if the platforms approve of your message. This isn't protecting democracy, it's creating a system where a handful of tech executives become the ultimate arbiters of acceptable thought.
The Silicon Six. All billionaires, all Americans who care more about boosting their share price than about protecting democracy. This is ideological imperialism. 6 unelected individuals in Silicon Valley imposing their vision on the rest of the world, unaccountable to any government and acting like they're above the reach of law.
The irony here is staggering. Cohen is criticizing tech executives for having too much power over information flow, while simultaneously arguing that these same executives should have even more power to decide what information people can access. He's saying they have too much influence, so the solution is to give them the authority to actively suppress voices they disagree with. Cohen wants to solve the problem of unelected billionaires controlling information by having those same unelected billionaires control even more information. The logical solution would be to reduce their power through decentralization and competition, not to expand their censorship capabilities.
But at a time when 2/3 of millennials say that they haven't even heard of Auschwitz, how are they supposed to know what's credible? How are they supposed to know that the lie is a lie? There is such a thing as objective truth. Facts do exist.
Cohen is using Holocaust ignorance to justify broader censorship powers, but this reveals the fundamental weakness of his argument. If 2/3 of millennials haven't heard of Auschwitz, that's not because of social media algorithms, That's because of educational failure. The Holocaust is extensively documented in traditional textbooks, museums, documentaries, and academic sources. If young people don't know about it, that's because the educational establishment failed to teach them, not because alternative voices on social media confuse them. Cohen is essentially arguing that because traditional institutions have failed in their basic educational responsibilities, we need to give tech companies the power to suppress information that might further confuse people. This is solving institutional failure by expanding institutional power.
Twitter could deploy an algorithm to remove more white supremacist hate speech, but they have reportedly haven't because it would eject some very prominent politicians from their platform. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Here Cohen reveals the true political agenda behind his censorship campaign. He's not really concerned about hate speech in general, he's specifically targeting conservative politicians. The suggestion that prominent politicians would be caught in anti-hate speech algorithms tells us exactly which politicians Cohen considers to be hate speakers. This isn't about applying neutral principles to protect people from genuine threats. This is about using hate speech policies as a weapon against political opponents. Cohen is essentially arguing that if the censorship algorithms would accidentally ban conservative politicians, that would be a feature, not a bug.
But if you pay them, Facebook will run any political ad you want, even if it's a lie. And they'll even help you micro-target those lies to their users for maximum effect. Under this twisted logic, if Facebook were around in the 1930s, it would have allowed Hitler to post 30-second ads on his solution to the Jewish problem.
This comparison is both historically ignorant and deeply manipulative. Hitler rose to power through traditional media channels, government institutions, and street violence. The Nazi propaganda machine was built on newspapers, radio broadcasts, and mass rallies, all controlled by centralized authorities. Hitler succeeded precisely because Germany had the kind of centralized information control system that Cohen is now advocating for. In contrast, decentralized platforms make it much harder for any single authoritarian figure to control the entire information landscape. Cohen is using the specter of Hitler to advocate for the very kind of centralized information control that actual authoritarians have historically used to gain power.
The ultimate aim of society should be to make sure that people are not targeted, not harassed, and not murdered because of who they are, where they come from, who they love, or how they pray. If we make that our aim, if we prioritize truth over lies, tolerance over prejudice, empathy over indifference, and experts over ignoramuses, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop the greatest propaganda machine in history.
Let's cut through the bullshit and examine what's really driving Sacha Baron Cohen's censorship crusade. This isn't about protecting democracy or fighting hate speech. This is about something much more specific and self-interested. Cohen is Jewish, and like many prominent Jewish figures in media and entertainment, he's terrified that unrestricted information flow will lead to increased scrutiny of Jewish influence in institutions. His entire speech is built around Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, but that's not because these are the most pressing problems on social media. It's because these are the issues that directly threaten his community's interests. Look at his specific examples. He's not concerned about anti-white racism, anti-Christian bigotry, or attacks on any other group. Every single example he gives comes back to anti-Semitism. The "throw the Jew down the well" bit, Holocaust denial, the protocols of the elders of Zion. His entire argument is constructed around protecting one specific group from criticism or scrutiny. Cohen knows that social media has allowed people to notice patterns that were previously suppressed by traditional gatekeepers. People can now easily research and discuss topics like Jewish overrepresentation in media, banking, and political influence, topics that were essentially forbidden in mainstream discourse when Cohen's gatekeeping friends controlled the conversation. The Silicon Six comment is particularly revealing. Cohen names these tech executives and points out they're all Americans, but he conspicuously avoids mentioning that several of them are also Jewish. He's upset that these platforms aren't doing enough to suppress conversations that make his community uncomfortable, but he can't say that directly, so he frames it as a broader issue about democracy and hate speech. This explains why Cohen is so focused on demanding that tech companies work more closely with the ADL. He's not asking for neutral content moderation, he's asking for content moderation that specifically serves Jewish institutional interests. The ADL isn't a neutral anti-hate organization, it's explicitly a Jewish advocacy group that has a long history of trying to suppress criticism of Jewish power and influence. Cohen's transformation from edgy comedian to censorship advocate makes perfect sense when you understand this context. When he was making Borat and Bruno, he was punching down at rural Americans, Muslims, and other groups that didn't have institutional power to retaliate. But now that social media has democratized information, people can punch back up at the groups that do have institutional power, including his own community. The timing of Cohen's speech is also significant. This was delivered at a moment when online discussions about Jewish influence were becoming more mainstream and harder to suppress. Topics that were once confined to fringe forums were starting to appear in mainstream social media conversations. Cohen and others in his community recognized this as an existential threat to the post-World War II consensus that made questioning Jewish power taboo. Cohen's constant invocation of the Holocaust isn't because Holocaust denial is actually spreading widely, but because Holocaust remembrance is one of the primary tools used to shut down uncomfortable conversations about Jewish influence in contemporary society. This is why Cohen's censorship demands are so specific and targeted. He's not asking for broad content moderation policies, he's asking for policies that will specifically suppress the kinds of conversations and research that make his community uncomfortable. He wants algorithms that will actively suppress content that questions Jewish institutional power while allowing other forms of controversial content to continue. The most telling aspect of Cohen's entire presentation is how he positions himself as speaking for all of democracy and all marginalized groups, when in reality he's advocating for policies that would specifically benefit one highly privileged and influential community. He's using broader concerns about hate and violence as cover for what is essentially a targeted censorship campaign designed to protect Jewish institutional interests from online scrutiny. Cohen knows that if he framed his argument honestly, "Please censor discussions about Jewish influence because they make my community uncomfortable," it would be immediately rejected. So instead he wraps it in universal language about democracy and hate speech, hoping people won't notice that all his specific examples and policy recommendations serve one particular community's interests. This is the real reason behind Cohen's censorship advocacy. It's not about protecting democracy or fighting hate, it's about maintaining a system where his community's institutional power remains beyond public discussion or criticism.